What the hell is going on with the Nintendo Switch 2? It was supposed to be the triumphant follow-up to one of the best-selling consoles in gaming history. A sleek hybrid system that could finally deliver the horsepower fans had been begging for while keeping that pick-up-and-play magic intact. Instead, just months into its release, the Switch 2 feels like it's already in damage control mode. Between chaotic pre-orders, storage headaches, accessory lockdown drama, and worrying signs from third-party developers, you'd think Nintendo was trying to speedrun its way into another Wii U-style slump. And the weirdest part, this is all happening despite blockbuster sales for its first-party games. When Nintendo officially opened Switch 2 pre-orders, it should have been a global celebration. But the rollout was a logistical nightmare, especially in Japan, where demand was so absurd that Nintendo resorted to a lottery system. If you were lucky enough to win, congrats! But for most fans, it was Scalper City. Units started popping up online at ridiculous markups before the official launch week had even started. That scarcity alone had people foaming with frustration, but it was the price tag that really made eyebrows shoot up. $449 to $499 depending on the bundle. That's the highest launch price for a Nintendo console in decades, inching dangerously close to what PlayStation and Xbox ask for far more powerful hardware. And yet, price wasn't even the first deal breaker for some early adopters. It was the storage situation. The Switch 2's 256 gigabytes internal space sounds decent on paper, until you realize modern first-party titles like Mario Kart World and Metroid Prime 4 can chew through 60 gigabytes or more. That's before you even glance at big third-party releases. Worse still, Nintendo's controversial game key cards make physical copies feel like a bait and switch. These aren't full game cartridges. They're basically glorified download keys. You buy a box, pop in the card, and instead of instantly playing, you're forced into a massive download that eats into your already tight storage. It's a practice players despise, and the backlash has been loud enough that chipmaker Macronix has reportedly fast-tracked new, higher-capacity cartridges for 2026. That's great news for the future, but it does nothing to help the current launch library. Then came the accessory drama. The Switch 2's USB-C port is locked behind a proprietary encryption system, meaning most third-party docks, chargers, and display adapters simply won't work. Unless you buy Nintendo's official options, often at double or triple the price, you risk bricking your brand new console. For a company that built part of the Switch brand on its versatility and travel-friendly design, this move feels like a self-inflicted wound. It doesn't help that a chunk of fans rely on third-party docks for portability, multi-device setups, or cheaper replacements, all of which are now effectively banned. And what about the games themselves? If you're a fan of Nintendo's own franchises, you're eating well. Mario Kart World has already cemented itself as a monster hit, and The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of the Sky, isn't far behind. But third-party developers? That's another story. Reports from industry insiders claim many devs struggled to get dev kits on time, were ghosted by Nintendo reps, or had to rush ports to meet launch day. The results are predictable: clunky performance, missing features, and, unsurprisingly, poor sales. In fact, early numbers suggest a staggering 86% of all physical game sales on Switch 2 so far are from Nintendo's own titles. That imbalance raises a red flag. Without strong third-party support, this generation risks becoming another closed garden ecosystem. Great for Nintendo superfans, but increasingly irrelevant to everyone else. For now, Nintendo's diehard audience is keeping the system afloat, but the cracks are showing early. And history tells us that once momentum slips, it's almost impossible to claw it back. Which brings us to the question: is this the start of a slow, painful slide, or just another rough launch that Nintendo can pull out of? Because, believe it or not, this isn't the first time the company has been here, and in the past, some of their biggest consoles started just as rough before turning into legendary successes. If you think the Switch 2's shaky first months are some unprecedented disaster, you might want to crack open the Nintendo history books, because this company has been here before. In fact, rough launch, surprise recovery might as well be in their corporate DNA. The only catch? Not every stumble has turned into a comeback. Let's rewind all the way to the early 80s. Nintendo's first home console, the Famicom, launched in Japan in 1983 to huge anticipation and almost immediately ran into a nightmare. Early units had faulty chips that caused crashes and glitches, forcing Nintendo to do a full recall. For a lesser company, that kind of launch day disaster could have been the end. But instead of folding, Nintendo quietly fixed the hardware, relaunched with a sturdier build, and by the end of 1984, the Famicom was a national obsession. That success gave them the confidence to bring it to North America in 1985 as the Nintendo Entertainment System. And that console didn't just recover, it saved the entire home video game industry after the 1983 crash. Fast forward to 1989, the Game Boy. Critics at the time thought it was too underpowered compared to color handheld competitors like the Atari Lynx. But Nintendo leaned on two things: Tetris as a killer app and absurd battery life. Within months, those inferior specs didn't matter. Game Boy was everywhere. It proved something Nintendo still banks on today. The right games and a few smart design choices can erase even glaring hardware shortcomings. Then there's the Nintendo 64 in 1996. This thing was hyped to the moon, but the launch was delayed multiple times because of hardware and development kit problems. By the time it hit shelves, it had a tiny launch lineup, basically Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings 64. But Mario 64 wasn't just a game. It was a revelation. It single-handedly carried the console's image for months and set a gold standard for 3D gaming. Even with a slower start and fierce competition from PlayStation, the N64 carved out a legacy built almost entirely on a handful of unforgettable titles. Of course, not every rocky start gets a fairy tale ending. Look at the Wii U. In 2012, it launched with a confusing name, an awkward gamepad, and almost no clear identity. Third-party support dried up in record time, and Nintendo's own software couldn't come fast enough to keep interest alive. No killer app, no momentum, and the Wii U became Nintendo's worst-selling home console ever. The 3DS sits somewhere in the middle of these extremes. When it launched in 2011, its $249 price point felt outrageous for a handheld, and the 3D gimmick didn't wow the masses. Sales tanked so fast that Nintendo slashed the price just 4 months later and offered free games to early adopters as an apology. That price drop, combined with a steady stream of heavy-hitter titles like Mario Kart 7 and Pokémon X/Y, turned the 3DS into a long-term success. The lesson here: Nintendo's history is full of consoles that stumbled out of the gate. Sometimes they pull off a dramatic save with a killer game, a smart price cut, or just letting time and hype do their work. Other times, they don't. The Switch 2 right now is straddling that dangerous middle ground. It's selling to the faithful, but the signs are mixed. Third-party droughts, pricing backlash, accessory controversies, and storage headaches, which means the next 12 to 18 months will be critical. This is where Nintendo either pulls a Game Boy and rides a single iconic title into history, or repeats the Wii U's slow fade into irrelevance. So, if the Switch 2 is teetering on the edge between a Game Boy-style comeback and a Wii U-level collapse, what exactly needs to happen to tip the scales in Nintendo's favor? The answer isn't one big magic fix. It's a mix of strategy, speed, and knowing how to feed both the hardcore fans and the wider market before frustration sets in for good. First up, storage has to be addressed fast. Nintendo's 256GB internal space might have looked fine on a spec sheet, but in practice, it's a bottleneck. Players are already juggling installs, deleting games to make room, or paying extra for huge SD cards just to keep their libraries alive. The game key card controversy only adds fuel to the fire. When you buy a physical copy and still have to download 50+ gigabytes, it kills trust. The Macronix plan to release higher capacity physical cards in 2026 is promising, but that's 2 years away. Nintendo can't just shrug and wait. They need a mid-cycle storage bump, or at least a more aggressive push to offer official expansion bundles that don't feel like a cash grab. Next, loosen the accessory lockdown. The USB-C encryption that blocks third-party docks might make sense from a protect the hardware standpoint, but it's coming off as pure anti-consumer. Right now, it's a headline-making annoyance that paints Nintendo as hostile to convenience. Allowing certified third-party accessories, like Apple's Made for iPhone program, could strike a balance. That keeps quality control intact, but stops punishing loyal players who just want options. Then there's the elephant in the room, third-party support. The early sales breakdown, where 86% of physical games sold are first-party, is a glaring warning sign. If Nintendo doesn't actively court external studios, the Switch 2 risks becoming a closed ecosystem that casuals eventually get bored with. That means more than just handing out dev kits. They need to incentivize exclusives, offer porting assistance, or even co-fund big titles that push the hardware. A single breakout third-party hit, like Monster Hunter Rise was for the original Switch, could shift perception overnight. And while we're talking perception, Nintendo's PR game needs an overhaul. The Switch 2 launch has been full of communication missteps, long silences on supply updates, vague answers about accessory bans, and no acknowledgement of third-party frustrations. Nintendo has always been secretive, but in 2025's social media-driven hype cycle, that's a risk. A more transparent update cadence, whether it's a quarterly Switch 2 Direct or direct responses to common complaints, could flip the narrative from Nintendo is ignoring us to Nintendo is listening. Finally, a killer, era-defining game. Yes, Mario Kart World is huge, but it's also safe. If Nintendo wants to replicate the Breath of the Wild launch magic, they need a shockwave moment, something that feels impossible on any other platform. Maybe that's a new Metroid Prime, a full-blown Pokemon MMO, or a bold new IP that reminds the world Nintendo can still surprise everyone. The point is, one game can redefine the Switch 2 story in a single news cycle, but it has to be more than just another sequel in the usual lineup. If they can nail even two of these, storage relief, accessory policy change, a big third-party exclusive, or a once-in-a-generation first-party hit, the Switch 2 could shake off its rocky start and cruise into a long, healthy run. But if Nintendo drags its feet, that's when the Wii U 2.0 headlines start writing themselves. If you're ready, I can wrap it up with Section 5. Conclusion: a fastball or a curve, tying everything together with a final punch that leaves viewers debating in the comments. The Nintendo Switch 2 is at a crossroads. On paper, it's still a hit. Units are flying off shelves, and the first-party heavyweights are posting massive numbers. But underneath that shiny surface is a system already weighed down by self-inflicted problems: supply chaos, overpriced accessories, lockdown hardware, shrinking trust in physical media, and a third-party scene that's looking thin just months into the generation. The thing is, none of this guarantees failure. Nintendo has been here before, more than once, and history proves they can stage a comeback that turns early stumbles into legendary runs. The Famicom recovered from a launch recall to dominate an entire decade. The Game Boy beat out more advanced rivals through smart software and design. The 3DS survived a near-death start with a bold price cut and a wave of hits. When they pivot fast, they win big. But the flip side is just as real. The Wii U's collapse wasn't sudden. It was a slow bleed caused by stubbornness, a confusing message, and the kind of silence that lets bad narratives stick. And right now, the Switch 2 is flirting with those same warning signs. So the next 12 to 18 months will decide everything. Will Nintendo double down on fan goodwill, loosen its grip on accessories, expand storage options, and bring in a showstopper of a game that forces everyone to pay attention? Or will they sit on their hands, let third-party support fade, and watch as the hype that launched this system slowly slips away? The truth is, both futures are possible, and that's what makes this moment so fascinating. The Switch 2 could be remembered as the console that stumbled early only to dominate for a decade, or the one that proved lightning doesn't strike twice. Either way, whatever happens next is going to be wailed. And when it comes to Nintendo, betting against them has burned more than a few people in the past. But this time, I'm not so sure. So tell me, where do you think the Switch 2 is heading? Is this just another rocky launch before a legendary rebound? Or are we watching the early days of a slow-motion crash? Drop your prediction in the comments, because the clock is ticking, and the next chapter in this story is going to hit sooner than anyone expects.